Okay, Sam Cooper. Scooper Cooper, I think is one. It used to be your Twitter handle, is it not?
It still is, and the story on that is when I was a Cub reporter at the North Shore Outlook, usually you could spell out your whole name, but I couldn't do it for some reason. I could just say S. Cooper at the North Shore Outlook, and so it became Scooper. Yeah.
Oh, that's well, and it's certainly, true to life, I think, because the work that you've done in Metro Vancouver, I think that you were published in the Sun and the Province as well as with Global, right?
Yeah, I went from the North Shore Outlook in North Vancouver to the province, and then it became the Sun, and then to Global in 2018, and then I crossed from Vancouver to Ottawa with Global.
And along the way, you wrote a book that I had thoroughly recommended to a lot of people called, Willful Blindness, which gave, I think, everybody a taste of the sort of things that your new enterprise, the Bureau, is into in a very, very deep way. Talk to us about the Bureau, and then we'll get into the good stuff.
Thanks. Yeah. And thanks so much for bringing it up like that. I mean, it really was a natural progression from willful blindness to continue, of course, doing my day job with Global and, digging into financial issues, business stories, political stories. And one of my favorites is, well, look, if something sketchy or a little perhaps systemic corruption is occurring that isn't stewarding Canada in the way it should be, the good ship should go, my job is to try to point that out. So in willful blindness, it was the best journalistic experience of almost 20 years because I could write at length. I could write with depth and density, which is something that I'm sometimes criticized for. But sometimes on complex issues, you need to write, very densely in a detailed way and with the evidence that's required. So I came to, I think, the maturity of my journalism career, and I decided it's time for me to do that type of writing from willful blindness in on the Bureau, which is my independent investigation platform. I write most of the stories, but I have some contributors. And my goal was, I can write on Canada, I can write on the United States, I can write on what's happening to Ukraine, I can write on the threats to Taiwan and why it matters to Canada. And that's what I've been at for about 7 months now, and it's going well.
That's good to hear. And I think in some sense, as we sort of segue into the discussion about foreign interference in Canada, I mean, the title of your book, Willful Blindness, honestly and candidly could be applied to the reaction that not necessarily your work, but CSIS and other, security agencies have been providing to the federal government. You've reported that there seems to be a hesitancy, and that's a kind word, to accept and act on the kind of intelligence that is being provided to government. Why do you suppose that is? Is there another consideration at work here that we need to know to sort of add context to what is or isn't happening?
Yeah, that's a very good it's a focused question, but it can get so broad because I've written about this and thought about it so much. I'll try to break it down into maybe 2 to 3 points. I've been thinking a lot and writing a lot, and now getting feedback from academics that have read my reporting and now are doing their own academic due diligence on that question. And really, I think, for 30 to 40 years, Canada's wise parliamentarians and high-level bureaucrats have thought that, of course, trading with the whole world is a good idea. Canada, the Asia Pacific strategy maybe it's still a good idea, but we're realizing now that when you're trading with countries such as China, we're now learning India maybe is in this bucket too. When you have regimes in those countries that aren't exactly playing by your good old Canadian or North American or European rules, you can suddenly find yourself to be running into some problems of what we call trade-based money laundering or foreign interference that's interwoven into trade, and the other guy isn't telling you about it. And so I think it becomes very difficult to realize before it's too late and maybe extricate a nation from some very serious challenges that are happening buried into trade that should be a good thing, but is hiding foreign interference channels, is hiding what we call, threat financing, to use the academic or CCC word, which is just money laundering by some bad people that work for foreign governments in our country. So that's my first answer. Financially, it's a difficult thing to change the direction of the good ship Canada when you're relying on trade with hostile states. Let's just call them what they are. I know this often gets redacted out of documents, so documents get leaked to me. Look, we're dealing with hostile states that there's a new term, hybrid warfare, that, look, I always explain to people, before Putin did this devastating war in Ukraine, he sent in oligarchs and spies and all kinds of agents with corruption deals to try to simply interfere in that country to make it easier to win without fighting. And when you can't win as much as you want without fighting, then it's war. So I rambled a bit there, but I think you get my point. Financial cannot be extricated from foreign interference. The second thing is, I often think, part of me, I was raised with a father that was trained to be a diplomat, and so he went another route. He became a Christian minister. And so in my mind, sometimes I think, maybe I'd like to be a politician or a diplomat instead of a journalist. And then I think that's a very hard job. You're dealing with a lot of good people, but without any question, in the modern world, there's going to be a lot of bad people coming at you when you're dealing with hostile state activity. And they're not going to have a name card saying, I'm a foreign agent. They're going to be a business person, or a business person that, as I'm, afraid to say, is really a gangster. So these kind of things, I believe Canadian politicians are in a very tough spot where we don't have modern counter-interference laws. And so it's kind of the Wild West out there. So as I think one of the CSIS former experts said in my very first story back in November 2022, without these proper laws in place, it's just CSIS telling you politicians, hey, be careful out there. And then if things go wrong, I believe that's the mess we're in right now.
Yeah, I have to say that I've been a politician now for 8 years, or going on 8 years. And the only time I was offered a bribe actually was from a manager at a major newspaper who wanted
Okay.
me in a past life to do something that he would like to have seen done. I
Oh,
won't go into details,
yeah.
but let's get right down then to the individual politician. So describe the sort of thing that happens. I mean, obviously, money or influence, or in some cases, blackmail is a piece of the action. But okay, you get to a few politicians. What good does that do? How does that then manifest itself? How does the interference play through and materially change thing in a society like Canada?
So let's just deal with the country that we all know, or the documents say very clearly that no threat even comes close to China. So very unfortunately, China has taken such a blessing to Canada, which is our multicultural society, and they have extended, the thuggish communist regime hand. I know some people on Parliament Hill don't want to hear it put this way, but this is what it is. I believe, your committee has found, that police station activity is real. So the police station is the very sharp point of the Chinese communist hard power in trying to not just go after supposed, financial fugitives, but have a known presence in our Canadian cities, which is intimidating, to which we can have people tracking dissidents, and we can have fear and put upon a community, so that in what we've determined, or I've reported, is the United Front system, people in the community are leveraged to approach the politicians as proxies. And so the politician certainly won't be handed a bag of cash or a red envelope from a Chinese communist consulate official. There'll be 5 or 6 layers of insulation and a very fluid, very sophisticated network of actors that at the end of the day either are taking directions or are taking directions from a person that's taking directions that's taking directions. At the end of the day, there's high level objectives being put, flushed into the community, as it were, from Beijing. And then you've got enforcers, in these police station networks that kind of, push things into action. And so at the end of the day, you're asking, how does the sort of threat of corruption approach politicians? With China and other nations, it works through community networks. And we know as politicians, we need to be out there shaking hands and looking for votes. And you could find yourself, out there and shaking hands with what should be a community member, if we don't have hostile state activity, can be turned into someone that's, trying to very subtly influence that politician looking for votes.
Well, I know that, from personal experience, you're in a room with, 350 of your closest friends, and, people are taking pictures with you and everything else. And then the next thing you know, you've had a picture taken with a character that, let's say, has a story.
Yep.
And that's happened to me. There was a fellow that was accused of shooting at somebody else, and I don't know whatever happened to the court case, but he was out and around, and I had a picture taken with him, and that was waved at me at, this is a couple of years ago. Um, in federal politics, or in national politics, I guess the canary in the coal mine has been Taiwan. I was over in Taiwan in April last year, and we were, talking to their security people and all of the work that they were doing to counter, misinformation, et cetera, et cetera. And the money, I mean, money, you follow the money in politics and as in a lot of other things, and that leads you to the people trying to exert some influence. The big thing, though, that I found in Taiwan, which may not necessarily exist here in Canada, is that in Taiwan there was a relative degree of public trust in the government. So if the government, set up an independent group to deal with misinformation, people would tend to trust that group to give them the straight facts when somebody else was trying to lead them astray. I don't know of any political entity in Canada that would enjoy that level of trust with people these days, which is a weakness,
Yeah,
right?
that's a great point. I mean, and I talked to Taiwan's top diplomat. I'll call him an ambassador in Ottawa, Dr. Harry Sang, and he said, "Look, they have a system called the 222 rule, which is they know most of the population know how much disinformation they're facing, and yet it's a very confusing environment with all this AI and bots and just it's hard to know what to believe. So they will have, not an elected official, but a they'll have the department head of whatever group, is targeted in disinformation. Let's just say it's a story that says the United States is using Taiwan to produce a bioweapon, which is one known case of disinformation we were told about by the ambassador in Ottawa. So the Department of Defense has to go out within, I believe, if they recognize it, within, is it 2 hours, and say in a very concise, something like 200 words, this is false. This is why. No, we're not making a bioweapon. We believe it came from this area. And here's 2 infographics to describe why it's false. And so that's taking as much as possible, I believe, the political side out of it. And you're putting up the government bureaucrat. And you're right, in a distrustful atmosphere, people are going to say, oh, that's government, trying to tell us what to think. But once you codify that and you have a standard, for example, if a politician was attacked on WeChat and we know that CSIS or CSC has to come out within 2 hours and say, this is a very serious allegation on WeChat, it's false, then we can build that trust. And this is a nonpartisan thing. We all know that all these nations are attacking politicians or maybe supporting politicians across the board. And so I believe you're right. We're in a space where there's a lot of distrust. but we need the right laws in place and then build the confidence in the officials that are enacting and enforcing those good best practice rules around disinformation or this kind of thing.
And that actually leads to probably an important point because we do have to talk about, well, what Canada needs to do. I mean, we have Taiwan's example, but Taiwan is a different place, different culture, probably different constitution, different laws.
Mhm.
Working within our regime here, advice that you would offer were you to be asked, about the kind of, systems, the kind of laws, the kind of regulations, and the level of enforcement necessary to make all of that stick. What would that look like ideally in Canada?
Well, starting with the disinformation, I'll stay on that theme. I had the good opportunity to meet with German government officials who had I was able to travel to Berlin, as I was starting up this year and talk to people about disinformation and how they try to do fact checks. And you don't want to go across the line to where you're telling everyone, the readers, the viewers, this is the government telling you what's true or false. But you need to be in that space where if something is so egregiously false that you need to try to build that trust, as I say, that, we believe this is harmful and, whether you trust us or not, it's our role to tell you this. And there's a lot of funding for so-called fact-checking, NGOs and things like that in Europe. The same situation in Taiwan, and I understand from their government that their NGO Doublethink Lab has offered its, counsel and assistance, I believe, to maybe the Canadian government or some European partners to talk about the successes they've had. And I totally get your point. I think we're in a very, sketchy place in North America in terms of the polarity politically and just, the partisanship and who do you believe. But Taiwan is really facing more threats than we are, and they've found a way to be able to build some sort of trust. So we can do it too. So that's more of a best practices thing, I think, having some trust in government agencies to give a counter narrative to egregious disinformation, especially hostile state disinformation. In terms of where we need to go in Canada, look, I just think it's a no-brainer that we could do a Canadian thing and sit here for 2-3 years and say, do we want a foreign interference registry or not? But I don't think that's prudent. Australia has a law. The United States has a law. The United Kingdom, other countries have laws, and they haven't, blown up into, worse societies than they were. In fact, I believe they're better societies because they can offer protection to groups that unfortunately diaspora groups are targeted by very dangerous forces. We see this in the news of we saw last week Iranian state actors allegedly hiring a Hells Angel to kill some Americans. This is not, I tell people again, I won't ramble too long, but let's not debate for 3 years what should be in a foreign interference law when that gives hostile states more chance to hire our gangsters and attack people around the world. No, we could charge that Hell's Angel as being a foreign agent because as I read the case, the allegations so far, he was acting for the Indian Security Services and took 350K or agreed to take that much to kill 2 Americans. So as Canadians, we need the laws to handle that guy in BC.
Wow. Another piece that you wrote recently, again about Taiwan and the recent election, was the sense that maybe some of the polling companies had been compromised, that were pushing out, and people read the polls and they find them entertaining, but I think the polls also have probably an undue influence, in fact, public perception about, the popularity of this person or this party versus somebody else. And to think that a polling company could be basically corrupted into putting stuff out that would lean the electorate in a certain way. I hadn't thought about that, but I guess this is sort of the nature of your work. You're coming across all these nasty bits all the time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That you picked up on a great point there. I mean, as I came to understand more, the allegation is I don't know if anyone has been charged or convicted yet, but a pollster was invited to go over to China, and then some sort of payment was made, and his the pollster's results favored the person that Beijing wanted to win, and so I'm not sure how successful the Beijing's efforts was. The Taiwanese officials definitely think that, the election was perhaps skewed a bit, to Beijing's divisive objectives, and yet it was free and fair. So that's saying that they have the systems in place that even though they understood things like their media being influenced or business persons very close to Beijing ran for one of the parties, which just very obviously to me looks like high-level interference efforts that didn't succeed, and that's to the credit of Taiwan. So, what else do they face? I would say that something I've written about is the use of organized crime. And in my reporting, I went over to Taiwan, and the high-level officials from the Mainland Affairs Council, which deals directly with Beijing, because Beijing won't deal government to government with the elected government. These officials told me that Beijing's methods are so sophisticated and nefarious that they paid off underground gambling rings and bookmakers who take a lot of bets on the odds of elections, and they tried to skew the odds again in efforts to get voters to see, how that would maybe influence them to vote for the guy that Beijing wants. So I'll end my answer with saying that I learned Taiwan has a very clear anti-infiltration law where a number of officials, I believe they've had over something like 150 charges under that law that came into place, I believe, 2019, 1 year after they realized that they believed a very severe foreign interference attack on the 2018 election. So 150 charges so far. And these are the types of charges. I know of a politician that allegedly received cryptocurrency to sort of do Beijing's bidding if she was elected. She wasn't elected, fortunately, but she's still facing those charges because she was exposed by the Taiwanese National Security Police.
And in Canada, we're supposed to, particularly for the electronic media, have rules about Canadian ownership. The majority has to be Canadian. Just like we now have rules that say a foreign person can't buy a home in Canada, and we've just extended that. But that it looks good on paper, but let's face it, are we being naive to think that somebody's not going to very quickly find a way around all of this stuff? And so, if we're dealing with this game of whack-a-mole, okay, with a sophisticated opponent that has if you like, the governance continuity, to be very patient and to, create this elaborate network that you spoke of. I mean, it's one thing if we're just walking along, with our eyes shut, but even with our eyes open, it would sound like we're going to have to make one heck of a major investment in investigation, in new laws, perhaps, and certainly in public education if we're going to deal with this.
Yeah, and again, you've raised a great, I'll call it a concept that you can say no to foreign ownership in homes or mines or water, jade, whatever. But in my experience, I've become an expert at this by now that foreign interference and hostile state activity employs the underground and the organized crime actors that are so good at getting around any laws Canada might put in place. So we can never hope to say we don't have foreign ownership of homes in Toronto and Vancouver when I know very well that things called a nominee buyer or a straw buyer is just a very simple concept that's used whether it's organized crime or a foreign government to own a mine in Alberta or to get into an oil field. This is what proxy business persons are used, how they're used by foreign governments. And
Yeah.
that's not just China, that's Russia, Iran, etc. So my point here is that uh, you need to have the right laws. Let's just come out and say it, laws a little bit stronger, like the United States or Australia, that there's actually some consequences if you're caught trying to infiltrate another country and you're working for a foreign government and you're a gangster or you're a shady business person. You're going to go to jail. And then that gives the police and our national security agencies more credibility, really. It gives them more credibility when they're talking to politicians and saying, we're going to give you a defensive brief. We think this guy that donated to you is not who he says he is. And then it's not just the police or the RCMP saying, hey, be careful. It's now we've told you we're actually investigating this guy, and it's probably a good idea that you run 100 miles in the other direction. So now the political class knows that, hey, they're not immune either. You can't be doing business or getting too close to people that are trying to undermine Canada.
Somebody should hire you to take everything that you've learned so far, turn it inside out, and produce a bit of advice, for people who sit where I sit, or people who want to, be a public servant of any kind. And that would not just include politicians. It would include, senior bureaucrats, et cetera, who have, let's face it, tremendous decision-making power and a lot of money backing it up. Wanted to really close because I mean, we could go on and on and on, and maybe this is the first of a few installments as we know more about what's going on
Yeah.
as we read the Bureau. Um, for a long time, I've been concerned about the well-being of Kim Bolan, who's an excellent reporter who reports on things that, holy cow, there's got to be some people not very happy with her. And you're kind of close to that line yourself. How's it been for you? Have you had any, adverse reaction from afar for the things that you've been writing about?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to share it with, if I was still living in BC, you might be my MP. So I'll, I'll tell you, first of all, Kim Bolan really is my hero as a reporter. When I joined the Vancouver Sun, I was right beside her desk, although she was often, running around chasing bad people or in other countries. But she has written about her concerns. It is true that she's so close to what the police know about the bad guys and right there writing about it that she had a line directly to the police if she had concerns. And she has written about concerns, as you know, that gangsters would drive by her home. So it got that bad. As for myself, I'm in a slightly different space where no, I won't put it that way. I mean, when we're talking about writing about governments, I'm not going to mince any words. State activity from China or Iran or Russia, I can tell you because, my sources like Kelvin Krusty, a great former RCMP transnational crime investigator in Vancouver, uh, these people have known for a long time that India as well, China, Iran, Russia, they use organized crime. So if I'm writing about China, yes, I have had concerns where the RCMP visited me in this past summer and said they had a Kim Bolan type situation for me. They'd learned because of my reporting on China that they'd learned, I'll just put it, some very concerning information. And so I followed up with the RCMP and provided information to them, and I hope I'm confident that they'll get to the bottom of it, or they're in a position to make people that might threaten Canadian journalists because they're reporting on foreign interference or fentanyl coming into Vancouver or bikers being used by Iranian intelligence. Hey, bad guys, stay away from our journalists in Canada. We don't play that stuff that they do in Mexico or China or Iran. So there's my answer, and I've told you what I think needs to happen as well.